The cold of space was nothing compared to the cold dread in Commander Kim Ji-hun's heart. Through the cracked main viewport of his ship, the Gwangju, he watched the enemy swarm. They were called the Xylothi. They looked like a cloud of giant metal insects, their ships glowing with a sickly green light. For 10 years, they had pushed humanity back world by world. The Gwangju was the last warship left. Now it floated, broken and burning, near the human colony of Arisia. The bridge was filled with smoke and the sharp smell of burnt wires. Red emergency lights painted the faces of his crew in shadows of despair. Warning alarms beeped, one after another, until Ji-hun silenced them with a slap of his hand. The quiet that followed was worse. It was the quiet of an ending. "Report," Ji-hun said, his voice rough but calm. He was a man in his 50s, with gray streaks in his black hair, and lines around his eyes carved by too many lost battles. Lee Yuna, his chief engineer, leaned over a shattered console. She was young, with sharp eyes that usually saw solutions in a mess of problems. Now they only saw the truth. "Main reactor is failing, Commander. We have minutes before containment breaks. Weapons are offline. Shields are at 3%. She didn't look at him. Saying the words felt like a betrayal dot at the helm. His old friend Park Tae-seok coughed, a wet, painful sound. A piece of broken ceiling panel had struck him in the chest earlier. He was bleeding, but his hands still rested on his dead controls. "The civilian convoy," Tae-seok gasped. "They've just jumped to hyperspace. They're clear." That was the mission. The only mission left. Not to win. To delay. To be the last target so a few thousand men, women, and children could run away. Ji-hun allowed himself one deep breath. They had done it. The Gwangju had held the line long enough. On the screen, the Xylothi swarm shifted. The largest ship, the hive ship, pulsed with energy. It was preparing to finish them. Then, it would turn its weapons on the undefeated colony below, where millions more waited for a death that was now certain. "Helm, any thrust at all?" Ji-hun asked, knowing the answer. Tae-seok shook his head, a grimace of pain on his face. "We're a rock, Ji-hun. A floating, bleeding rock." Ji-hun looked around his bridge, at his crew. Some were dead at their posts. Others looked at him, waiting for an order, for a miracle. He had no more orders. No miracles. Only one last duty. "All hands," he said, his voice carrying through the ship's intercom. It echoed in the silent, wounded halls of the Gwangju. "This is the commander. Abandon ship. Proceed to escape pods." This is not a request. No one moved on the bridge. They just stared. "That's an order." He roared, the force of it making Yuna jump. "Get off my ship, now." The spell broke. The living crew moved, helping the wounded, stumbling towards the hatch. Ji-hun turned to his friend. "Tae-seok. Time to go." Tae-seok smiled, a thin trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. "My legs don't work, old friend. You go. Someone has to—" "Tell them we didn't just vanish. I'm not leaving you." "You are," Tae-seok said, his voice firm. "The commander doesn't die with one ship. He lives for the next one. Go. That's my last order to you." Ji-hun's jaw tightened. He gave a single, sharp nod. He took one last look at his friend, at the chair where he had sat for 30 years, then turned away. Yuna was waiting at the hatch, a medical kit and a data drive in her hands. "The core logs," she said. "Proof of what we did." He didn't care about proof. But he followed her. The corridors of the Gwangju were nightmarish. Fires burned where there was still oxygen. Sparks fell from torn cables like dying stars. They passed crew members sealing themselves into pods, their faces pale with fear. The metal of the ship groaned around them, A dying animal's final cry. They reached Pod 7, the last one in their section. The hatch was bent. Ji-hun put his shoulder against it and pushed until it screamed open. Yuna climbed in. He was about to follow when the entire ship lurched. A Xylothi energy lance, meant to destroy them, had instead torn through a distant section. The shockwave threw Ji-hun back into the corridor. The pod hatch started to close automatically. "Commander!" Yuna screamed, jamming her arm in the door to stop it. Ji-hun scrambled to his feet. He dove forward, squeezing through the narrowing gap just as the hatch sealed with a final hiss. Yuna immediately went to the controls. "Hang on!" She hit the launch sequence dot with a violent jerk. The pod blasted away from the dying Guangzhou. Small thrusters fired, pushing them clear of the wreckage. Through the small, thick viewport, Ji-hun watched his ship. The Guangzhou was magnificent in her death. The Xylothi hive ship fired its main weapon. A beam of pure green energy, brighter than a sun, speared through the darkness. It struck the Guangzhou right in her heart, where the reactor was failing. For a second, nothing happened. Then, light. A white, silent explosion that swallowed the proud shape of the ship. The hull ripped apart, pieces spinning into the void. The central fireball expanded, burning away the last symbol of human strength. It was fast. It was quiet. It was over. The last human warship was gone. The shockwave from the explosion rocked their tiny pod. Alerts flashed. Life support was damaged. Power was failing. They were drifting, a speck of dust in an ocean of night. Ji-hun didn't look at the warnings. He stared at the fading embers of his ship, his home, his duty. The green lights of the Xylothi swarm now turned, as one, towards the blue-green marble of Arisia. They began to move, a locust cloud descending on a ripe field. There was nothing left to stop them. A deep, hollow emptiness opened inside Ji-hun. It was more than sadness. It was the end of a story. Mankind's story. He had failed. Not just his crew, but every human who would die below. The weight of it pressed him into his seat, making it hard to breathe. Yuna was crying silently, her hands still on the bed controls. "What do we do?" she whispered. Ji-hun had no answer. He closed his eyes. He waited for their air to run out. He waited for the end. Then he felt it. It was not a sound. There was no sound in space. It was a vibration. A deep physical tremor that passed right through the metal of the pod and into his bones. It was low and resonant, like the first note of a bell made for a giant. The stars outside seemed to shimmer for a moment. Yuna gasped. "Did you feel that?" Ji-hun opened his eyes. The feeling faded as quickly as it came. His instruments showed nothing. No energy spike, no new ship signature. Just the empty scan and the approaching Xylothi. But he had felt it. Something in the dark had stirred. The escape pod was a dying metal coffin. The air was getting thin and cold. Kim Ji-hun and Lee Yuna sat in the silence, broken only by the rasp of their own breathing and the faint, sad beep of a low-power alert. Outside the small, thick viewport, the destruction of Arisia had begun. From this distance, it was just silent flashes of green light on the planet's night side. Cities dying without a sound. Ji-hun did not watch. He stared at his hands, resting on his knees. They were still smudged with black soot from the Guangzhou's bridge. Commander's hands. Now they commanded nothing. The hollow feeling was all that was left inside him. "We're drifting towards the moon," Yuna said quietly. Her voice was scratchy. She was looking at the one screen that still had a flicker of power. It showed their trajectory. Arisia's moon, a gray, pockmarked rock called Karen, was getting larger in their view. It had no atmosphere, no value. The Xylothi ignored it. It was just a grave marker. Gravity will pull us in, she continued. The crash. It might be quicker than suffocation. Ji-hun just nodded. It didn't matter. The moon filled the viewport, a barren landscape of dust and sharp rocks. There was no gentle descent. The pod tumbled, its stabilizers dead. It hit the surface in a series of brutal, jarring impacts. Metal shrieked. Ji-hun was thrown hard against his restraints. Something cracked in his shoulder. Dust blotted out the stars. Then, stillness, for a long moment. There was only the ringing in Ji-hun's ears and the sharp pain in his collarbone. The pod was tilted. Red emergency lights, now battery-powered, cast a hellish glow. The air was filled with the smell of burnt electronics and dust. Yuna unbuckled herself with stiff fingers. She checked a readout. Hull is, miraculously, intact. But life support is gone. We have maybe an hour of air, Commander. Less if we move around. Ji-hun unbuckled his own straps. The pain in his shoulder was a bright, sharp thing. It felt good. It was something real to focus on, better than the emptiness. Then we move, he said, his voice flat. We don't wait here. They forced the manual release on the hatch. It opened with a groan, spilling moon dust into the pod. The air they had left began to hiss out into the vacuum. They had to go now. They climbed out onto the surface of Karen. The sky was black, strewn with brilliant, uncaring stars. Aresia hung in the distance, a beautiful blue marble, now scarred with the faint, cancerous green of Xylithi bombardment. Ji-hun turned his back on it. The landscape was dead. Absolutely dead. Gray dust underfoot, rocks that had lain unchanged for 1 billion years. Their suits were basic emergency gear, with maybe 45 minutes of oxygen. They had no destination. Which way? Yuna asked, her voice coming through the suit radio. Ji-hun pointed at a nearby ridge. Up, see what we can see. Then he didn't finish. There was no then. They trudged through the dust, their steps slow and heavy in the low gravity. The only sound was their breathing, loud in their helmets. They climbed the ridge. At the top, they saw more of the same. A vast, empty plain, shadowed craters, absolute desolation. Yuna's engineer mind wouldn't quit. She fumbled with a portable scanner from her suit pocket, powering it on with its last bit of charge. Maybe there's a cave, shelter, or maybe some old survey equipment we can scavenge for a signal. She swept the scanner slowly across the horizon. It beeped. A weak, broken sound. She looked at it, frowning. That's wrong. What? Ji-hun asked, not really caring. Deep geological reading. Not rock, alloy, and a power signature. Faint, but it's there. Kilometers down. She shook the scanner, tapped it. The reading grew stronger, not weaker. A steady, rhythmic pulse coming from directly beneath their feet. It's probably a glitch, Ji-hun said. The scanner is dying. No, Yuna said, her curiosity sparking back to life, fighting her despair. The signature is too clean. And look. She pointed at the ground. The dust around them was settling in a strange pattern, not random. It formed faint, concentric lines, almost like a giant fingerprint pressed into the moon's crust. They were standing right in the center of it. It's not natural, she whispered. Before Ji-hun could argue, the ground trembled. Not a quake. It was a single, solid thrum, the same deep vibration they had felt in the pod, but now stronger. Much stronger. A slab of rock 10 meters away suddenly sank down, then slid sideways with a grating rumble they felt through their boots. Dust plumed up in the airless void, then fell in weird, slow curtains. Where the rock had been, there was now a ramp. Perfectly smooth, made of a dark metal that seemed to drink the starlight. It led down into absolute darkness. Ji-hun and Yuna stared. No words came. This was impossible. The moon was scanned, catalogued, empty. Yuna took a step forward. A bunker? A secret base? Whose? Ji-hun asked, his tactical mind reluctantly engaging. Ours? From when? No one's been here in decades. And that technology? He nodded at the ramp. It was seamless, as if grown, not built. We have 20 minutes of air, Commander, Yuna said, starting down the ramp. Down there is different from out here. That's all I know. He had no argument. He followed. The ramp descended at a gentle slope. The darkness was total for about 50 meters, lit only by their suit lights. Then, soft, blue-glowing lines appeared in the walls, pulsing gently in time with the vibration. The air around them changed. A pressure hissed, and a display on Ji-hun's suit flashed. Atmosphere detected. Breathable. They looked at each other in disbelief. Carefully, Yuna cracked the seal of her helmet. She took a small, testing breath. Then a deeper one. It's clean. Better than clean. It's like mountain air. They took off their helmets. The air was cool and carried a faint, metallic scent. The corridor opened into a vast space, so huge their suit lights couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls. The blue lines in the floor now spread out like veins, all leading towards the center of the cavern dot, and there, in the center, was the source dot. It was a ship. But to call it a ship felt wrong. It was a mountain of dark metal, sleek and silent. It made the Guangzhou look like a child's toy. Its shape was long and graceful, like a blade kept in the dark for 1,000 years. No engines or weapons were visible. Its surface was perfectly smooth and unbroken. It rested on the rock floor, but it did not look landed. It looked placed. They walked towards it, their footsteps tiny echoes in the immense silence. As they got closer, they saw that the dark hull was not blank. Faint, golden symbols were etched into it, patterns that flowed like water or circuitry. They were beautiful and utterly alien. Then, as Yuna stepped within a few meters of the hull, the symbols under her feet glowed brighter. They shifted, rearranged. The strange, flowing script melted and reformed into something else. Into letters. Ji-hun froze. He knew those letters. They were from Earth, from Korea, an older form, but readable. Along the massive, curved flank of the vessel, words resolved from the light. Mulgweisen. Water ghost. A spirit from old Thales that dragged the drowning down into the deep. It's ours? Yuna breathed, reaching a hand out but not daring to touch the hull. But how? This technology. It's beyond anything we have. Beyond anything the Xylothi have. As if in answer, a section of the hull directly in front of them dissolved. There was no door, no seam. The material simply flowed away, forming a perfect arched entrance. Warm, white light spilled out. A voice filled the air. It was calm, androgynous, and seemed to come from everywhere at once. It spoke in the same ancient Korean. Genetic scan complete. Authorization confirmed. Designation: human. Origin vector: Sol 3, tertiary branch. Welcome. Ji-hun found his voice. It was a dry croak. Who are you? What is this place? This is the Long Watch vessel, Mulgweisen, the voice replied, the language shifting smoothly into modern tongue. I am its guardian. You are in a time of existential threat. Primary directive is active. The light from the entrance brightened, illuminating the giant, silent ship behind the voice. It was not just a ship. Ji-hun realized with a dizzying lurch. It was a soldier, waiting in a tomb. And they had just woken it up. State the nature of the threat, the voice said. Patient as stone. Ji-hun looked back, towards the ramp, towards the world being murdered above. He straightened his aching shoulders. He looked at the ancient super-warship, and then at Yuna. For the first time since the Guangzhou died, the emptiness inside him was gone, replaced by a fierce, burning spark. "Xylithy," he said, his voice now clear and hard. "They are exterminating us." "All of us?" A deep, powerful hum answered him. It rose from the very rock, from the ship itself. The blue lines in the floor blazed with light. All across the dark hull of the Molgweisen, golden symbols ignited like a constellation coming to life. The Guardian's reply was simple. "Acknowledged." The bridge of the Molgweisen was not like any bridge Kim Ji-hun had ever seen. There were no rows of consoles, no frantic crew stations. The room was circular and quiet, with walls that seemed to be made of dark, polished stone. In the center, two simple, chair-like forms grew from the floor. The main view was not a screen, but the entire forward half of the room, perfectly transparent, showing the gray rock of the cavern wall dot as Ji-hun sat in one of the chairs. It adjusted silently to his shape. Lee Yuna took the other, her engineer's eyes wide, trying to take in everything at once. The calm, androgynous voice spoke again, seeming to come from the air around them. "I am the custodian of this vessel. You may call me the Guardian. Biological readings indicate stress and injury. Do you require medical attention?" Ji-hun's shoulder throbbed. "Later, tell me what this ship is, and how it is here." A soft light glowed in the air, and images formed. They saw an Earth from long ago, but with ships in the sky that looked like the Molgweisen. "This vessel is a relic of humanity's first diaspora," the Guardian explained. "A time of great exploration and great conflict. Your current civilization is what we would classify as the third diaspora. Much knowledge was lost in the intervening ages. This ship, and others like it, were placed in strategic hibernation. Our directive, to wait and to safeguard the survival of the human species in the event of an existential crisis. Others?" Yuna asked, hope leaping into her voice. "My sibling vessels are dormant in other locations. I cannot activate them. They will awaken only if their own guardians detect a threat, or if I send a specific all-clear signal, which I have not done for 9,742 years? 9,000 years." The number was too big to understand. Ji-hun pushed forward. "Your weapons. What can you do?" The view shifted. The rock wall outside seemed to dissolve, replaced by a tactical display of stunning clarity. It showed the space above Arisia. The Xylithy swarm was a cloud of angry red dots. The hive ship glowed brightly. Data scrolled beside each symbol size, power output, weapon types. The Xylithy utilize focused bioplasma and kinetic projectiles, the Guardian stated. Their strength is in numbers and biological adaptability. Their technology is, by my parameters, rudimentary. A new set of schematics appeared, showing the Molgweisen. This vessel operates on different principles. We do not merely attack. We manipulate fundamental forces. Primary armament includes gravity inversion projectors, local spacetime distorters, and molecular disassemblers. Defensive systems are multi-layered void shields and adaptive quantum plating. The words were strange, but the meaning was clear. This was not just a better gun. It was a different kind of war. "Can you destroy the swarm?" Ji-hun asked, his heart pounding. "Analysis suggests a 97.3% probability of total enemy elimination," the Guardian replied. The number hung in the air, a promise of salvation, so absolute it was dizzying. But then Yuna, ever the engineer, leaned forward. "At what cost? You've been asleep for millennia. What is your current status?" A series of amber symbols flashed across the display. "Acknowledged. Full systems diagnostic now complete. Total vessel capacity is at 41.2%. The primary vacuum energy core has decayed. It cannot be repaired with available resources. Many secondary systems are offline. The weapon systems you inquire about are functional, but operating them at full capacity will cause severe stress to the core. What kind of stress? Ji-hun demanded. If I engage the entire swarm simultaneously using maximum yield weapons, the core will likely undergo a cascading failure within 4.7 minutes of combat initiation. This would result in the destruction of this vessel and the annihilation of all biological life on the moon below. The hope that had begun to burn in Ji-hun's chest turned cold. So it was a trade. A single, glorious, and suicidal battle. He could avenge the Guangzhou. He could wipe the Xylothi from this system in a blaze of ancient fire. But then the Molguisen would be gone, and the colony on Arisia would still be defenseless against the next swarm. He would save them only to leave them orphans again. That is not acceptable, Ji-hun said, his commander's instincts taking over. The despair was gone, replaced by the cold calculus of tactics. There must be another way. A surgical option. The display zoomed in on the Xylothi hive ship. The swarm operates as a collective consciousness, the Guardian said. The hive ship is the central processor. Eliminate it, and the remaining units will lose coordination. They will not retreat, but they will become uncoordinated. Less effective. Could the colony's defenses handle a confused swarm? Ji-hun asked, "Why you NA dot?" she thought, chewing her lip. Maybe. Their planetary defense guns are still active. They could pick off disorganized ships. It would be a fight, but a possible one. Right now, with the swarm directed? No chance. Ji-hun stared at the glowing red symbol of the hive ship. It was the brain. He had to cut off the head. It was a classic, almost ancient strategy. What is the probability of eliminating the hive ship without causing core failure? He asked. Probability rises to 68.9% if we use a single, precise application of a space-time distorter, the Guardian answered. It would require a close-range jump and a perfectly calibrated shot. Stress on the core would be high, but within survivable parameters. However, it would expend a significant portion of our remaining weapon energy. We would have little left for a prolonged engagement. We won't need a prolonged engagement, Ji-hun said, his voice firming with decision. One shot. One target. We don't fight the swarm. We break its will. He stood up from the chair and walked to the transparent wall, looking at the rock, as if he could see through it to the battle above. He was no longer the commander of a lost ship. He was the temporary master of a sleeping god of war. The weight was immense, but it was a familiar weight. Yuna, he said, not turning around. Work with the Guardian. Learn everything you can about that core. Find a way to stabilize it, even a little. I don't care if you use moon rocks and prayer. Buy us every second of operational time you can. Yuna nodded, already tapping at a panel of light that had appeared next to her chair. I'll try, Commander. Ji-hun addressed the air. Guardian, prepare the ship. Plot a microjump. I want us to appear right on top of that hive ship. The second we're in range, you fire. Understood? Acknowledged, the Guardian replied. The soft hum that filled the ship deepened in pitch, becoming a powerful resonant thrum. The golden symbols on the distant walls of the cavern began to glow brighter. Outside the view, the rock started to tremble. Dust fell from the cavern ceiling high above. With a sound felt more than heard, a massive section of the moon's surface began to slide open far above them. Starlight, real and unfiltered, pierced the darkness of the tomb for the first time in millennia. It shone down on the sleek, dark hull of the Molguisen. The ship began to rise. Silently, gracefully, it lifted from the stone floor. It floated upward towards the opening sky. Ji-hun watched as the cavern walls slid past, then the jagged edges of the moon's crust, and then the infinite starfield before them. Hanging in the black was the planet Arisia, and around it, the glowing pestilence of the Xylothi swarm. The ancient supership was awake. It was time to hunt. The silence of the Molgwyzen's bridge was absolute. It was the deep, waiting quiet of a predator in the dark. Kim Ji-hun sat perfectly still in the command chair, his eyes fixed on the view ahead. The planet Arisia filled half of it, a beautiful world under a death sentence. Swarming around it, like flies on rotten fruit, were the Xylothi ships. Their green navigation lights were a vile constellation. Lee Yuna's hands flew over the holographic console beside her. Numbers and symbols streamed past, a language of power and stress she was only beginning to understand. Core stability is holding at 40.8%. The distorter is charged and ready. Gravimetric jump coordinates are locked. The hive ship? Ji-hun asked, his voice low. It's holding position near the planet's north pole, the Guardian's calm voice reported. A red circle appeared on the view, highlighting the larger, bulbous shape of the Xylothi command vessel. It was surrounded by a dense cloud of defenders. Execute the jump, Ji-hun said. Out there was no lurch, no roar of engines. The stars outside simply blurred and stretched into lines of light. The sensation was like a single smooth step. The lines snapped back into points. They were there. One moment, empty space near the moon. The next, they were in the heart of the swarm. The Molgwyzen hung silently, a vast, dark shard of obsidian suddenly appearing amidst the chitinous green hulls of the Xylothi. For a shocked second, nothing happened. The alien ships continued their mindless bombardment of the planet below, unaware of the new moon in their sky. Then, alarms must have sounded across the swarm. The Xylothi ships closest to them shuddered, changed course. Their weapon ports glowed, targeting the intruder. Incoming fire, the Guardian stated, no urgency in its tone. A dozen green plasma bolts lanced across the void, striking the Molgwyzen's hull. Ji-hun braced for impact. It never came. The bolts simply vanished. They hit a shield that wasn't even visible, dissolving into harmless swirls of emerald light that rippled and faded. Void shields at 99.97%. Yuna read, awe in her voice. The Xylothi fired again. 100 bolts. 1,000. The space around the Molgwyzen became a storm of green fire. The view was lit up with violent, silent explosions. The ancient ship didn't move. It just hung there, taking the punishment without a scratch. They can't touch us, Ji-hun whispered. Their weapons lacked the necessary harmonic frequency to bypass the primary shield, the Guardian explained. It would require approximately 7 hours of continuous fire from the entire swarm to induce failure. 7 hours. The Gongju had lasted 7 minutes, but they were not here to tank fire. Ji-hun's eyes were on the primary target. The hive ship was turning, its vast bulk moving with surprising speed. A terrible, organic-looking aperture was opening on its front, gathering a familiar sickly green energy. It was the same weapon that had killed the Guangzhou. It's targeting us. Yuna warned. Hold position, Ji-hun ordered. Let it fire, Commander? Yuna asked, her voice tight with fear. Let it commit. The hive ship fired. A beam of concentrated bioplasma, thicker than a city tower, erupted across the distance. It was a river of death that could melt through planetary crust. It struck the Molgwyzen head-on. The bridge was bathed in green light. The shield held, but this time a visible sphere of distortion appeared around their ship, shimmering like a heat haze. The power of the beam was immense. Shields at 82%, Yuna called out. Stress on the core is spiking. Now, Ji-hun said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Fire the distorter." "At the source." "Acknowledged," the Guardian replied. The Molgweisen did not fire a bolt of energy. Instead, a sphere of distorted darkness, like a hole in reality, shot from its hull. It was small, no bigger than an escape pod. It flew silently into the heart of the still pouring green beam. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the laws of physics seemed to stutter. The giant bioplasma beam twisted. It bent towards the tiny dark sphere, as if being sucked down a drain. The sphere swelled, swallowing the horrific energy. Then it vanished and reappeared. A micro wormhole, a hair's width across, opened directly inside the firing chamber of the hive ship. The entire colossal river of green plasma, every joule of energy the hive ship had poured into its attack, was dumped back into its own guts. The effect was not an explosion. It was an unraveling. The hive ship didn't blow up. It came apart. Its armored hide bulged, then split like overripe fruit. Green fire erupted from 1,000 seams. The ship's structure flaked away, pieces tearing off and spinning into the void. In less than 10 seconds, the central command node of the Xylothi swarm was reduced to expanding. Silent debris. On the bridge, Ji-hun let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. But the battle wasn't over. The swarm, bereft of its brain, did not flee. It descended into chaos. Ships collided with each other. Some continued to fire mindlessly at the planet. Others turned their weapons on the Molgweisen, their attacks even more frantic and uncoordinated. "Core instability is increasing," the Guardian reported. "Multiple system failures are cascading through the secondary grids. We must withdraw for recalibration." "No," Ji-hun said. He looked at the planet. The colonial defense guns were now firing, bright trails of light punching up into the disorganized swarm. They were fighting back, but there were still thousands of Xylothi ships. "We can't leave them yet. Give them cover. Use the gravity projectors. Break up their formations." "Understood." The Molgweisen finally moved. It slid forward, graceful and terrible. Where it pointed, space warped. A group of 20 Xylothi cruisers suddenly found themselves crushed together by an invisible fist, their hulls merging in a scream of tearing metal. Another swarm of fighters was caught in a sudden vortex of twisted gravity, spun into a blender of debris. It was not a fight. It was a cleanup. The ancient ship moved through the chaos, like a scythe through wheat down on Narration. In a battered planetary defense bunker, a young militia pilot named Park Soo-min stared at her sensor screen. Her face was smudged with dust and sweat. For hours, she had watched the inevitable approach of the swarm. She had said goodbye to her family over the Kumdat then. The impossible had appeared. A black ship, like a legend made real. She saw it eat the hive ship's attack and kill the giant with its own weapon. She saw it twist physics to destroy the enemy. Tears she had been holding back streaked through the grime on her cheeks. It wasn't hope she felt. It was awe. Raw, terrifying awe. "What is that thing?" Her commander whispered over the COMMS. Soo-min just shook her head, watching the Dark Angel work its wrath above her world. On the bridge of the Molgweisen, the amber warnings were now flashing red. "Core failure is imminent," the Guardian announced, its voice still calm. "We must disengage, now." Ji-hun saw the colonial defenses were holding. The swarm was shattered, its remaining ships being picked apart. He had done what he came to do. "Pull back," he ordered. "To the moon." The Molgweisen turned, leaving the chaotic battlefield behind. It slid back into the quiet darkness, a ghost returning to its haunt. But as it moved, internal alarms shrieked. A section of the hull where the hive ship's beam had struck darkest glowed a faint, ominous red. They had won the battle. But the ancient superwarship pushed too far too fast, was dying around them. The victorious return to the moon was a funeral march. The Mulguisen slid back into its cavern with a shuddering groan that vibrated through the deck plates. The beautiful, silent hum of the ship was now a sick, irregular wheeze. The blue glowing lines in the floor and walls flickered like dying lightning bugs. Kim Ji-hun stood on the bridge, the image of Arisia's saved skies still hanging in the air. But the red warning sigils reflected in his eyes. They painted his exhausted face in pulses of alarm. Liuna was buried in holographic data streams, her fingers flying. "It's the core," she said, her voice tight. "The vacuum energy matrix is collapsing. The stress from the jump and the distorter shot. It was too much. We've got cascading failures in every primary system. Can you fix it?" Ji-hun asked, already knowing the answer. Yuna looked up, her expression grim. "No, not fix. This isn't a broken engine coil. It's like a star dying from old age. We can maybe stabilize it, but only if we shut down almost everything else. Weapons, shields, the main drive. All of it has to go into a low-power preservation mode. If we try to fight again, even once, the core will rupture. It'll take this moon and half of Arisia with it." The emptiness threatened to return. They had found a god, and it was mortally wounded after a single miracle. It was a cruel joke. Ji-hun walked to the transparent wall, now showing only the dark rock of the tomb. He had felt, for a brief moment, the power to protect. Now it was being snatched away. "So we hide it," Ji-hun said, his back to Yuna. "We seal the tomb again. And we hope the next time humanity needs a savior, in 100 or 1,000 years, it might have one last spark left. That is our legacy? A secret we keep?" Before Yuna could answer, the Guardian's voice filled the space, softer than before. "Your assessment is accurate, Engineer Yuna, but your conclusion is incomplete." A new schematic appeared, replacing the warnings. It was not of weapons or shields. It was of databases, crystalline memory banks, fabrication forges, and educational simulators. The image of the Mulguisen shifted, its weapon blisters retracting, its hull reconfiguring into a different shape, a sprawling, grounded complex. "I am not merely a warship," the Guardian said. "I am an ark, a repository. My primary directive is to safeguard humanity. Warfare is one subfunction. Preservation and propagation of knowledge is the core function." Ji-hun turned, a frown on his face. "What are you saying?" The first diaspora understood that ships break. Heroes die. But knowledge, if preserved, is eternal. My databanks contain the full architectural schematics for my power systems, my drives, my hull materials. The science behind the gravity distorters you used. The principles of the void shields. This is not just data. It is a blueprint. A seed. The schematic zoomed in, showing plans for smaller, simpler versions of the technology, things a recovering civilization could actually build. You propose we build a new fleet? Yuna asked, her eyes wide. "I propose you rebuild a civilization," the Guardian corrected. "The Mulguisen cannot fight another battle. But it can become the cradle. It can use its remaining years to teach. To fabricate the first new reactor cores. To train the first new engineers in lost sciences. My body is dying. But my mind, the knowledge within me, can live again in yours." The idea unfolded in Ji-hun's mind, vast and overwhelming. It was not the thunderous victory he had imagined. It was quieter, slower. It was not about being the shield, but about teaching others to forge their own. A communication request chimed. It was from the Arisian Colonial Defense. Yuna looked at Ji-hun, who nodded. She opened the channel. A young woman's face appeared, streaked with dirt, but blazing with fierce life. This is Lieutenant Park Soo-min of Aresia Defense. We saw you. We don't know who you are or what that ship is, but on behalf of every soul breathing down here today, thank you. Ji-hun stepped into view. You fought well, Lieutenant. The victory was yours as much as anyone's. Was it ours? Soo-min asked, her gaze sharp. That ship? It's like nothing we have. The Xylophie will be back. What happens then? Ji-hun took a deep breath. He made a decision. Then you will be ready. We have a proposition for your government. We have located a facility, a repository of old knowledge. We need engineers, scientists, soldiers willing to learn. We need to build something new here. Not just a monument, a school, a forge. Soo-min's eyes widened. After a moment, a slow, determined smile spread across her face. Sir, you'll have a line from here to the capital. Just tell us where to go. The transmission ended. The path was clear. It was not the path of a warrior, but of a gardener. It was harder. For the next weeks, they worked. The Molgweisen, with its last strength, used its internal fabricators to carve out living spaces, labs, and lecture halls from the moon rock around it. The first groups from Aresia arrived, led by a wary but eager Park Soo-min. They walked into the cavern with the same awe Ji-hun and Yuna had felt. Ji-hun stood with Yuna on a new observation platform, built into the cavern wall. Below them, the Molgweisen no longer looked like a weapon ready to launch. Its hull was connected by graceful walkways to new structures. Light and activity buzzed around it. It was the heart of a new hive, a human one. The core is stable, Yuna said quietly, at 8% capacity. It can power the cradle's basic systems, the fabricators for the first prototypes, for maybe a decade. The Guardian is already teaching the first class on vacuum energy theory. Ji-hun nodded. He looked at his hands. They were no longer the hands of a warship commander. They were the hands of an administrator, a planner, a reluctant teacher. It was not the role he had wanted, but it was the role that was needed. The Guardian's voice spoke beside them, gentle. The last human warship was destroyed, Commander Kim. A necessary death. From its ashes, and from my awakening, a choice was made. Not to be a weapon that is eventually spent, but to become a seed that grows. The story of the Gwangju is now a lesson in courage. My story will become a lesson in possibility. You are not an ending. You are a bridge. Ji-hun looked out at the bustling activity below, at the young faces of Soo-min and others staring up at the ancient ship with wonder, not fear. They saw not a savior, but a teacher, a library, a future dot he finally understood. The victory over the swarm was just a moment bought. The real work began now. It was slow. It would be frustrating. He might not live to see a new ship built from these plans take flight. But as he watched a group of young Aresian engineers, led by Yuna, begin their first practical lesson on the Molgweisen's hull, he felt it. Not the fiery thrill of battle, but the steady, quiet warmth of a spark being carefully passed on. The last human warship was gone. The ancient superwarship was retiring. And humanity, armed with a forgotten past, finally had a future.